It was July the 3rd, 1988. The Persian Gulf, already a place of unease and suspicion, was about to witness a tragedy that would shock the world. At Tehran's bustling Mehrabad International Airport, Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian Airbus A300, prepared for a short journey across the Gulf to Dubai. Families boarded, children laughed as they found their seats, and business travelers glanced at their watches. To them, it was just another flight. But to the U.S. Navy warship USS Vincennes patrolling the Gulf, that same Airbus would soon appear as something far more sinister. Within minutes, a chain of errors, misread signals, and fear-driven decisions would lead to 2 missiles being launched at the unsuspecting plane. The result: the deaths of all 290 people on board, including 66 children. This is the story of Iran Air Flight 655, a shootdown so disturbing that many believe the Pentagon tried to erase it. The tense background. To understand the tragedy, you must first understand the context. The late 1980s were a time of violence and suspicion in the Middle East. Iran and Iraq had been locked in a brutal war. Since 1980, both nations had attacked oil tankers in the Gulf to strangle each other's economies. The U.S., heavily dependent on Gulf oil, stepped in with Operation Earnest Will, sending warships to protect tankers. The Persian Gulf became a powder keg. U.S. warships sailed daily through contested waters. Every radar blip was scrutinized, every approaching aircraft treated with suspicion, and the U.S. Navy was already on edge. A year earlier, in 1987, the USS Stark had been struck by an Iraqi missile, killing 37 sailors. Nobody wanted a repeat of that nightmare. Into this volatile setting came USS Vincennes, commanded by Captain Will Rogers EE. It was one of the most advanced ships in the Navy, bristling with the Aegis, radar system, and guided missiles. Designed to protect fleets against enemy aircraft, it was built to make split-second kill decisions. But no one could have predicted how a simple civilian flight would be mistaken for an enemy jet. Flight 655 begins. Iran Air Flight 655 was a short hop, less than 30 minutes in the air. On the morning of July the 3rd, the Airbus A300 lifted off from Tehran, stopped at Bandar Abbas to pick up more passengers, then continued toward Dubai at 10:17 a.m. It left Bandar Abbas climbing along a commercial air corridor used every day by countless flights. In the cockpit, Captain Mohsen Rezaian and his crew followed standard procedures. They broadcast their civilian transponder code. They were climbing steadily, following their flight path exactly as planned. To them, it was just another routine day in the skies. But below, on the radar screens of the USS Vincennes, that same Airbus looked like something else entirely. The mistake: the Vincennes detected the aircraft leaving Bandar Abbas. Crew members immediately thought it might be an Iranian F-14 Tomcat, a powerful fighter jet capable of attacking the cruiser. In truth, it was the Airbus, but stress and fear blurred the data. Operators misread the radar. They believed the aircraft was descending toward them, not climbing away. They thought its speed matched that of a fighter, not a commercial jet. And when radio warnings were issued on military channels, the Airbus never responded. Why? Because civilian airliners don't monitor military frequencies. Inside the Vincennes, the tension grew. Reports circulated that the plane might be hostile. The Aegis system displayed conflicting data, and human operators interpreted it in the most threatening way. To Captain Rogers, the picture was clear. A hostile jet was diving on his ship. The deadly decision. At 10:24 a.m., Captain Rogers made the call. To surface 2, air missiles streaked into the sky, locked onto the fine radar blip that was Iran Air Flight 655. Inside the Airbus, the passengers likely had no warning. Some might have felt the vibration of impact. Others may have seen a sudden flash through the window. In an instant, the plane exploded into a fireball, breaking apart mid-air. Wreckage and bodies rained into the Persian Gulf. On board were 290 people, 274 passengers, and 16 crew. Among them were 66 children. None survived. The aftermath. News of the incident spread rapidly across the globe. In Iran, sorrow and outrage filled the air as families gathered near the coastline, hoping for answers. Fragments of the aircraft and personal belongings drifted ashore, a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. Iran's government condemned the attack, accusing the United States of intentionally striking a civilian airliner. Demonstrations broke out in several cities as citizens demanded justice and accountability. In Washington, officials maintained that the USS Vincennes had acted in self-defense, claiming the Airbus had been misidentified as a potential military threat. They described the event as a tragic mistake rather than an act of hostility. Around the world, the explanation drew widespread scrutiny and debate as governments and observers questioned how such a disaster could have occurred. Contradictions and cover-up. From the very beginning, inconsistencies emerged. Independent radar data proved that the Airbus was climbing, not descending. It was following its scheduled commercial airway. It was broadcasting a civilian transponder code that should have been visible to the Vincennes. Even more damning, the Vincennes was inside Iranian territorial waters when it launched the missiles, yet U.S. officials initially denied this fact, painting their ship as a victim of aggression. To critics, it looked like the Pentagon was trying to cover its tracks, shaping the narrative to protect its reputation. Aviation experts, international observers, and grieving families all asked the same question. How could the most advanced warship in the world fail so disastrously? The investigation. The U.S. Navy conducted its own inquiry, and the results were chilling. They found that the Vincennes crew had misread data, believing the Airbus was descending when it was climbing. Stress, poor communication, and the fog of war led to catastrophic decisions. But instead of punishing the officers involved, the report seemed to excuse their actions. Captain Rogers and his crew were described as having acted in the heat of battle, doing what they thought was necessary to protect their ship. Years later, Rogers even received the Legion of Merit, an award that outraged the families of the victims. In 1996, the US and Iran reached a settlement at the International Court of Justice. The US agreed to pay $61.8 million in compensation to the families, but crucially, it never admitted legal responsibility or issued an official apology. To this day, many believe that was no accident, that the Pentagon deliberately minimized blame, hoping the world would forget. The human toll lost in the politics were the human stories. Parents who buried children, children who lost parents, entire families wiped out in a second. One man lost his wife and 2 sons, ages 7 and 9. Another family was traveling for a wedding. None of them came home. These were not soldiers or combatants. They were teachers, students, workers, mothers, and fathers. They had no connection to the war raging around them. Eyewitnesses from nearby boats described a horrific scene. The sea littered with debris, bodies floating alongside toys and clothes. For the families, the grief never ended. For many Iranians, Flight 655 became a symbol of U.S. arrogance, a reminder that their lives were seen as expendable. Legacy of Flight 655, the shootdown of Iran Air. Flight 655 remains one of the darkest chapters in both aviation and military history. It was not just an accident. It was a devastating convergence of human error, political tension, and the misuse of advanced technology. The tragedy revealed how, in a high-pressure environment where fear and suspicion dominate, even the most sophisticated systems can fail catastrophically. In just a few seconds, the lives of 290 men, women, and children were erased, not because of technical malfunction, but because of misjudgment amplified by mistrust. The consequences rippled far beyond the wreckage in the Persian Gulf. For Iran, the attack became a lasting symbol of injustice, fueling decades of anger and reinforcing the belief that the United States would never take responsibility for its actions in the region. The refusal to issue a full apology deepened the resentment and poisoned relations for generations. For many in the U.S., the incident was quietly buried, an uncomfortable reminder of how military might, combined with flawed decision-making, can lead to unspeakable tragedy. Yet among aviation experts and historians, the legacy of Flight 655 serves as a critical warning. It is a reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, cannot eliminate the risks of human miscalculation. It is also a lesson about accountability, that great powers must act with humility, transparency, and care, especially when civilian lives hang in the balance. More than 3 decades later, Flight 655 is not just a memory, it is a cautionary tale. It forces the world to confront the true cost of error and the arrogance of unchecked power. Above all, it underscores the fragile nature of human life and why tragedies like this must never be forgotten. Closing reflection. When you step onto a plane, you put your life in the hands of more than just the pilots in the cockpit. You rely on a vast network of systems, the air traffic controllers who monitor the skies, the engineers who built the aircraft, the maintenance crews who ensure it is safe, and in regions of conflict, even the military radar operators who are expected to distinguish between friend and foe. On July 3, 1988, those systems collapsed in the most catastrophic way imaginable. A commercial airliner, an Airbus A300 carrying families, students, and ordinary travelers, was mistaken for an enemy fighter jet. In a matter of minutes, 209 innocent lives were erased, not because of mechanical failure or bad weather, but because of human misjudgment in the fog of war. The U.S. Navy cruiser, USS Vincennes, positioned in the Persian Gulf, fired 2 surface-to air missiles, striking the aircraft with deadly precision. What should have been a routine flight from Bandar Abbas to Dubai ended in fire and wreckage scattered across the sea. The event shocked the world not only for its brutality, but also for its preventability. The passengers were never combatants, never threats, yet they were caught in the deadly intersection of politics, war, and human fallibility. In the aftermath, governments scrambled to manage the narrative. The Pentagon initially claimed the plane had been descending in an attack profile. Later evidence proved the Airbus had been climbing normally along its civilian flight path. Families of the victims demanded answers, but they were met with official statements that felt cold, calculated, and detached from the grief echoing across Iran and beyond. Compensation was eventually paid, but no true accountability ever satisfied the weight of the loss. For many, the incident symbolized the arrogance of power and the tragic consequences when complex systems fail to value human life above politics. And yet, as with every aviation disaster, lessons were extracted. International organizations moved to strengthen procedures for identifying aircraft in conflict zones. Civilian and military coordination was reinforced to prevent such misidentifications in the future. Commercial airlines adjusted flight paths to avoid volatile regions. Safety grew from the ashes of tragedy, but it came at the cost of hundreds of innocent lives. Decades later, Iran Air Flight 655 remains more than just a case study in aviation safety. It is a haunting reminder of how fragile the line between peace and catastrophe can be. The image of burning wreckage on the waters of the Persian Gulf is seared into aviation history, a scar that cannot be erased by time or politics. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Technology can advance, systems can improve, but human error, when combined with military aggression, can still bring devastation in an instant. When we look back on that day, we remember more than just a flight number. We remember mothers holding children, families returning home, people with hopes and futures that were ripped away. Their story warns us that in war, in politics, and in human error, it is always the innocent who bear the highest cost. And that is why Flight 655 must never be forgotten.